Now, in-depth coverage of the Texas legislative session. In session, in depth.
Good morning, I'm Josh Hinkle. Work wrapping up this weekend at the state capitol as another special session comes to an end. Lawmakers only have until Tuesday to get their work done. Between the regular session and these two special sessions, lawmakers have been at the capitol since January. That's 198 days. And there's been the threat of staying a little longer if they didn't wrap up one last issue. During this special session, Governor Perry set 3 goals for lawmakers. 2 they accomplished quickly. The most controversial item, a host of new restrictions on abortions and abortion providers. Lawmakers also passed a new sentence for 17-year-olds convicted of murder. But with just days left, transportation funding has had a more uncertain route. But lawmakers finally reached a deal, and now it only needs final approval from both chambers. In November, voters will have to approve a constitutional amendment to divert at least $800 million from the rainy day fund to highways. Without the compromise, the governor had threatened a third special session.
Don't think just because you have the power to call us back, you're going to get the votes. In fact, to be honest with you, if I get called back, I'm going to have a very bad attitude.
For an in-depth look at this Texas-sized problem, KXAN's Aaron Cargile spoke this week with transportation consultant John Langmore.
Right off the top, how serious is transportation right now in Texas?
Well, I would say, it's pretty serious right now, but it's destined to get much worse. The Texas Department of Transportation is forecasting that a current budget for roadways of $6 billion will drop to a little more than $2 billion in 2015 if they don't do something to fix it. As you might know, our gas tax has been stuck really since the early 90s. We haven't raised it at all. The price of building roadways has gone up, but cars have become more fuel efficient, so it costs more to build each lane of roadway, and everyone that's driving on them is paying less to drive on it. So it's kind of like a perfect storm in that it costs more and they're getting in less income. So we've got a real issue in terms of how we're going to deal with funding transportation infrastructure going forward.
So more work needs to be done, but less money's coming in.
That's right, and this session as we are sitting here, they are talking about what they're going to do this legislative session. They're basically looking at putting about $800 billion into the TxDOT's budget. TxDOT says they are $4 billion short of what we need to, well, they used to say $4 billion short of what we need just to hold things steady. Yesterday, they just increased that amount to $1 billion because of all the work that needs to be done because of the shale drilling out in mainly West and North Texas. So we're $5 billion behind where we need to be. That's just to maintain current levels of congestion. So I-35 stays just like it is if we get $5 billion more than what they already have right now.
Mm-hmm. In the grand scheme of things, how does Texas compare to other states?
Well, we have the largest road network in the country with about 300,000 miles of roadways. We have about 51,000 bridges. So in some respects, we're kind of a victim of our own success. In the past, we funded our transportation system really well, and we built a lot of infrastructure. Now we have to go out and maintain it. So it's a huge burden and a huge liability to maintain our existing network. So we've got the biggest network in the country, but I would say our funding shortfall and our circumstances, where fuel efficiency is going up and the cost of, at the same time that construction cost is going up, that's common across the country. Every state in the nation is dealing with that same dynamic of funding their transportation infrastructure. And, really we haven't seen any political leadership to really deal with how we should fund this going forward. They kind of do things 1 year at a time, and that's just not sustainable, and we're sort of paying the price today.
Mm-hmm. All of the focus has been on roads, but should the legislature be looking at other alternatives?
Well, no, you're right. That, for instance, the $800 million that they're talking about putting into TxDOT's budget this legislative session has to be dedicated just for roadways, and all of the gas tax by law, again, is dedicated just for roadways. In my opinion, you're asking someone that serves on the board of Capital Metro, so I'm a bit biased in that regard. But I would also say that what we traditionally do is look at, to deal with our congestion, we look at increasing the supply of roadways. And it's getting expensive and very hard to do and difficult to fund. What you also need to be looking at is the demand side of the formula, and the way it's tough to reduce the demand. One way you can do that is to put more into public transportation, so you move fewer people with less vehicles. That could be either rail or buses. Another one is that you try and grow in a way that people don't have to rely on their automobile to do as many daily needs. Like today, you know, if you live in a far-flung suburb, to get a cup of coffee, you have to get in your car, you know, drive probably on a fairly major road to get the coffee and then go back home. So that's huge demand on the transportation network. If you live downtown, you ride the elevator down, you walk across the street, and you grab a cup of coffee and go back. So if you can start to develop that way, you reduce some of the demand on the roadway, but that's a long-term solution to a near-term problem. So that's kind of what we're struggling with.
All right, last question. Fast forward 50 years, if nothing is done with transportation in Texas, what's the one word that comes to mind?
Gridlock. Yeah, no, it's going to be, you know, our population in the next roughly 20 years is expected to grow to over 30 million people. That's more than 40% what it is today. You know, if we don't find a sustainable way to fund our transportation network, and really it should be viewed as an investment, if we don't get some political leadership and make an investment in our roadways and our public transportation, it's not going to be a very nice place to live. I mean, you can't take your current success for granted, and the state of Texas is doing great, but all you need to do is look at Detroit, which was once, you know, one of the great cities in the world and just filed for bankruptcy recently. If you don't fix problems that you know are there, eventually they'll catch up with you.
Thanks to Aaron Cargile for that interview. Looking beyond the legislative session and special sessions, we're about to witness a political tidal wave that hasn't hit Texas in many years.
Any future considerations I will announce in due time.
Without Governor Perry on the ticket next year, what will it mean for politicians here? And what will Perry do with all of his free time? Next on In Session, In Depth.